The porcelain plate slipped from my hands and shattered across the kitchen floor just as the first tear hit the front of my cream-colored apron. I dropped to my knees before anyone could see my face, gathering razor-sharp fragments with trembling fingers while the laughter from the grand ballroom drifted through the swinging doors as if joy belonged to another world. "Grace," the head housekeeper snapped without looking at me. "The Romano family doesn't pay you to cry." I nodded, because answering would only make my voice break. Instead, I reached for another shard, pressing my lips together until they turned white. A thin line of blood appeared on my fingertip where the porcelain kissed my skin, but I wiped it quietly against the inside of my apron before anyone noticed. One broken plate cost less than my dignity. Tonight, I couldn't afford to lose either. Beyond the kitchen doors, crystal glasses chimed beneath golden chandeliers while politicians, judges, and business leaders toasted another successful charity gala inside Romano House. Here, steam clouded the windows, burners hissed, and exhausted hands kept invisible lives moving. I bent to pick up the final piece, then carefully folded the torn corner of my apron back into place with the same gentle motion my mother had taught me years ago, as though small things deserved respect even after they broke. The habit steadied my breathing. It always did. "Grace." This time the voice was softer. One of the younger cooks silently held out a clean towel. I smiled, shook my head, and handed it back. His shift had another 4 hours left. Mine did too. He would need it more than I would. Before he could insist, footsteps echoed across the marble hallway outside the kitchen. Every conversation stopped. Every cook instinctively straightened. No one announced who had arrived. They never needed to. Adrian Romano entered without hurry, his tailored black jacket still carrying the quiet authority of the ballroom he had just left behind. His gaze skimmed across polished counters, simmering pots, exhausted staff, then settled on me. Not on the broken plate. Not on the blood hidden beneath my sleeve. On my face. I lowered my eyes first. It felt safer that way. The housekeeper rushed forward with practiced confidence. "Everything is under control, Mr. Romano." She was careless, but we're handling. Adrian lifted one hand. Not harshly. Simply enough for silence to obey. He stepped around the broken porcelain instead of through it, crouched just long enough to lift the largest shard from the floor himself, and placed it carefully on the counter where no one else would cut their hand. "Finish cleaning after your finger stops bleeding," he said quietly, his attention still on me rather than the mess. "The kitchen can wait 5 minutes." No one argued. My throat tightened. I should have thanked him. I should have accepted the mercy. Instead, I untied the strings of my cream-colored apron with shaking hands, folded it into a neat square, placed it beside the broken plate, and met his eyes for the first time. "If my tears dishonor this house," I whispered, "I'll leave before they do." Then I turned toward the servants' entrance, choosing to walk away before anyone could stop me. The servants' entrance was only a few steps away when his voice stopped me. "Grace." It wasn't loud. It didn't carry the weight of an order. Somehow, that made it harder to ignore. My hand remained on the cold brass handle, but I didn't open the door. Behind me, the kitchen had gone silent again. Adrian Romano waited until every curious I drifted back toward the stoves before taking another step. "Walk with me." I shook my head without turning around. "If I stay, everyone will think you changed your mind because you felt sorry for me." A quiet pause settled between us. "And if I leave," I added, "they'll think you threw me out." Neither answer protected either of us. Another few seconds passed before he spoke again. "Then let's stop giving them something to guess about." He pushed open a side door leading to the small herb courtyard behind the kitchen instead of the grand hallway. No audience. No guards. No servants pretending not to listen. He waited outside without looking back, leaving the decision entirely to me. After a long breath, I followed. Evening air replaced the heat of the ovens. Lavender brushed softly against the stone path. Adrian rested one hand on the weathered wooden table beneath a lantern but kept a respectful distance. "Who made you cry?" The question landed gently, almost carefully. I lowered my eyes to my folded apron still resting across my arm. "No one." "That's not true." His voice stayed calm. "Someone believed they had the right to take your dignity." I traced my thumb across the stitched edge of the apron instead of answering. "If you tell me who it was," he continued, "I'll know where the problem started." I finally looked up. "And then what?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than any promise could have. Whatever he intended, it would carry consequences beyond tonight. I tightened my grip on the fabric. "That's exactly why I won't tell you." A faint breeze stirred the herbs between us. He studied the small cut on my finger before reaching into his jacket. Instead of taking my hand, he simply placed a clean white handkerchief on the table within reach. "Use it if you decide to." Then he stepped back. He didn't insist. He didn't touch me. He didn't move the choice away from me. I stared at the neatly folded cloth for a long moment before wrapping it around my finger. "Thank you," I said quietly. It was the first thing I'd accepted from him. Adrian gave a small nod, as though gratitude required no repayment. "You folded your apron before you walked away," he observed. "Most people would have thrown it on the floor." My fingers paused. My mother believed we should leave every place with more respect than we found it. Something almost imperceptible shifted across his face before disappearing. "That's a difficult promise to keep." "It is." We stood in another brief silence, no longer strangers, not yet allies. Then he asked again, softer than before, "Grace, who made you cry?" I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. Telling him would invite his power into my life. Refusing him would keep the burden mine alone. When I opened them again, I chose neither escape nor surrender. I turned fully toward him and whispered, "If I answer, you have to promise you'll listen before you decide what to do." Adrian met my gaze without hesitation. "You have my word." "I wasn't crying because someone was cruel," I said. Adrian's expression didn't change, but the hand resting beside the lantern went still. I unfolded the cream apron across my arms and smoothed the wrinkled fabric with my good hand. "I was crying because my mother made me promise I would never let cruelty teach me how to hate." The courtyard seemed to narrow around the words. Adrian looked toward the kitchen door, where shadows moved behind the frosted glass. "Who asked you to break that promise tonight?" I shook my head. "You promised to listen before deciding." His jaw tightened once. Then he stepped away from the door. "I'm listening." I told him about the guest who had snapped his fingers at the youngest server, about the housekeeper ordering the boy to accept blame for a spilled drink he hadn't carried, about the apology I gave in his place because he had 2 younger sisters depending on his wages. I did not give Adrian the guest's name. I gave him the truth I could live with. "The plate broke because my hands were shaking afterward," I said. "That part was mine." Adrian glanced at the cut beneath his handkerchief. "You protected the boy and accepted the punishment." "I made a choice." "That doesn't make every consequence someone else's fault." The kitchen door opened. The head housekeeper stood rigid beneath the frame. "Mr. Romano, the guests are asking for you." "And Grace has abandoned her station." I reached for my apron before Adrian could answer. "She's right." His gaze returned to me. "You resigned." I walked away angry. I tied the apron strings with uneven fingers. The knot slipped once before I managed to secure it. The cooks still have 90 plates to finish. Leaving them short would punish people who did nothing to me. The housekeeper's mouth thinned. "You cannot simply decide when your employment continues." "No," I said. But I can finish the work I already promised to do. Adrian opened the door, then waited for me to pass first. Inside, one burner had gone out. A sauce was beginning to separate. The young cook who had offered me the towel stood frozen beside it while the housekeeper watched him. I crossed to the stove, lowered the heat, and showed him how to bring it back slowly instead of throwing the pan away. When his breathing steadied, I handed him the clean towel he had tried to give me earlier. Adrian noticed. So did the housekeeper. "Gray stays until the last plate leaves this kitchen," he said. She drew herself upright. "And afterward?" Adrian looked at me rather than answering for me. I swallowed, then lifted my chin. "Afterward, I will tell you the name." The room shifted. Not because I had surrendered, but because he had waited. Adrian removed his jacket, placed it over the back of a chair, and rolled his sleeves once. "Then I'll stay until you're ready." No one in Romano House had ever seen its master wait for a maid. By choosing to do it in front of them, he made my answer more dangerous, and gave it value before he even heard it. Adrian kept his word. He remained in the kitchen until the final plate disappeared through the dining room doors, speaking only when someone needed an answer and leaving every smaller decision to the people who earned their place there. When the last burner was turned off, I untied my apron once more, folded it into the same careful square, and placed it on the wooden table. This time, no one mistook the gesture for surrender. Adrian waited until the cooks had left before stepping beside me. "You promised me a name," he said quietly. I nodded, but instead of speaking, I looked toward the dark hallway leading back to the ballroom. "If I tell you because I'm angry," I replied, "I'll become the kind of person my mother warned me about. If I tell you because someone else might be treated the same way tomorrow, then I'm choosing responsibility instead of revenge." His eyes stayed on mine for a long moment. "Walk with me." We crossed through corridors I had only cleaned after everyone else had gone home. The portraits on the walls watched in silence. Security guards lowered their heads as Adrian passed, but what surprised me most was that he greeted each of them by name. Every one. None looked afraid. They looked accountable. When we reached his study, he pushed the heavy door open and stood aside instead of entering first. "Inside," he said. "Not because you work for this house. Because you asked me to listen." I stepped across the threshold knowing servants rarely entered this room. There were no gold statues or displays of wealth, only shelves of worn books, ledgers, family photographs, and a large map covered with handwritten notes. Responsibility lived here, not luxury. Adrian closed the door softly behind us. "Now tell me." I took a slow breath. "Councilman Victor Hale." Adrian didn't interrupt. He humiliated one of the youngest servers because the wine arrived late. The boy wasn't responsible. I apologized instead. I looked down at my wrapped finger. The plate broke afterward because I couldn't stop shaking. Silence settled between us. Adrian walked to the window, his shoulders rigid, one hand resting against the glass. For the first time since we met, I saw hesitation instead of certainty. He could solve the problem with one command. He chose not to. "Victor funds 3 community shelters," he said at last. "Removing him publicly would hurt people who never wronged you." I hadn't expected that answer. It would have been easier if he had simply been ruthless. Instead, he carried consequences no one else in the room had to carry. "Then don't do it for me," I said. "Find another way." He turned back slowly, studying me with something deeper than curiosity. "Most people bring me problems. You brought me a boundary." Before I could answer, a discreet knock broke the quiet. Adrian's chief of security entered just far enough to speak. "Sir. Councilman Hale has already filed a complaint. He claims a maid insulted him and is demanding she be dismissed before morning." The room grew still again. Adrian looked at me. "You can leave now," he said. No one will blame you. I understood what walking away would mean. My old life would remain untouched, but everyone who had stood beside me in that kitchen would face tomorrow without me. I slowly picked up my folded apron from the chair where I had laid it. No, I answered. If this house is going to decide who I am, then I should be here when it does. Adrian gave a single nod. In that moment, he stopped seeing me as someone who needed protection and began seeing me as someone willing to help carry the weight of difficult choices. And by choosing to stay, I quietly closed the easiest road back to the life I had known. I stayed. The decision settled over the room with a weight that could not be folded away as neatly as my cream-colored apron. Adrian dismissed his security chief with a quiet nod instead of an immediate command. The door closed, leaving only the two of us and the complaint that now sat between us like another person. He picked up the written report, read it once, then placed it back on the desk untouched. He did not tear it apart. He did not sign it. He simply let the silence ask a harder question than either of us expected. If I remove Victor Hale tonight, he said at last, everyone will believe power decided who was right. I looked at the family photographs resting beside the ledgers. None of them faced the room. Every frame pointed toward his chair. And if you do nothing, I answered softly, everyone in the kitchen will believe dignity depends on who has the louder voice. Our eyes met. For the first time, neither answer felt acceptable. Adrian walked to the bookshelf and reached for a small wooden box tucked behind several worn journals. He opened it only long enough to remove an old linen handkerchief, its edges carefully stitched by hand. The fabric had yellowed with age. He unfolded it with the same deliberate care I used every time I folded my apron. His fingers stopped on one corner before he quietly wrapped it around my injured hand, replacing the spotless white cloth he had given me outside. He never explained why that old piece of linen mattered. He simply tied the knot gently enough that it barely touched the cut. I looked down at it, then back at him. Something I had noticed since the kitchen finally made sense. Every careful pause. Every refusal to humiliate someone in front of others. Every decision to wait before acting. None of it came from hesitation. It came from discipline. He was not protecting his authority. He was protecting people from the damage his authority could cause. A knock interrupted us again. This time the chief of security stepped inside without crossing the threshold. Sir, Councilman Hale has informed several guests that the maid fabricated the entire incident. The staff is beginning to panic. Adrian remained still. The easiest path was finally in front of him. He could dismiss me, calm the guests, and save the evening. Instead, he turned toward me. What would you protect first? He asked. Not what I wanted. What I would protect. I looked through the study door toward the quiet hallway leading back to the kitchen. The people who still have to work there tomorrow. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then he made a choice I knew could never be undone. No one is dismissing you, he said. Not tonight. Not because someone powerful demanded it. He rang the bell for his chief of staff. Prepare a private meeting with Councilman Hale after the guests leave. No public accusations. No retaliation. The steward hesitated. Sir, delaying this may damage your relationships. Adrian answered without raising his voice. Then my relationships will bear the cost. As the steward left, I finally understood why everyone in Romano House obeyed him without fear. He never asked others to carry a price he refused to pay himself. I tightened my fingers around the old linen handkerchief, no longer seeing it as a bandage but as a promise handled with care. In that moment, I made my own choice. Whatever happened after tonight, I would not stand by while someone used kindness as a weakness. And by choosing to defend the values he had protected instead of simply defending myself, I crossed a line neither of us could ever uncross. Adrian's decision spread through Romano House before midnight, not because anyone announced it, but but because no servant was asked to lower their eyes when Councilman Victor Hale's name was spoken. The quiet itself became dangerous. I returned to the kitchen, tied my cream-colored apron, and finished preparing breakfast orders as though the night had changed nothing. It had changed everything. Every glance lingered a second longer. Every whispered conversation stopped when I entered. I had not been dismissed. Someone else had paid the price for that. By sunrise, the first consequence arrived. The suppliers who depended on Hale's office delayed their deliveries without explanation. Half the pantry shelves stood empty. The cooks looked to Adrian's staff. Adrian's staff looked to Adrian. Instead, Adrian looked at me. "What do we protect first?" he asked. "Not the gala. Not the reputation of the house. The people." I studied the remaining ingredients before answering. Feed everyone who works here before worrying about appearances. It meant serving a simpler breakfast to distinguished guests while ensuring every employee still had a meal. It was the right choice. It was also the fastest way to provoke the councilman further. Adrian gave the order without changing a single word. No one argued aloud, but everyone understood the message. Dignity had just become official policy. By noon, the response came. Victor Hale cancelled 2 charitable partnerships connected to Romano House and quietly informed local business leaders that Adrian could no longer separate personal feelings from professional judgment. The damage was invisible, respectable, and painfully effective. Adrian read each report without anger. When he finally placed the papers aside, I noticed he had skipped lunch. Without asking permission, I carried a bowl of hot soup into his study and set it on the corner of his desk beside the old linen handkerchief he had folded with the same care I gave my apron. "You forgot to eat," I said. He looked at the bowl, then at me. "You remembered." Neither of us smiled. We didn't need to. It was only a bowl of soup. Yet somehow it felt heavier than every document on his desk. Before he touched it, another message arrived. Hale had requested interviews with several kitchen employees, offering promotions to anyone willing to testify that I had insulted him without reason. He wasn't attacking me anymore. He was attacking the trust we had built. Adrian closed the envelope and stood in silence. "If I forbid anyone from speaking," he said, "I'll become exactly what he already claims I am." I understood. "Then let them choose." He looked at me carefully. "Some may choose against you." My fingers tightened around the folded edge of my apron. If their jobs feed their families, they should have that choice. Saying the words hurt more than I expected. Adrian saw it. He reached for the old linen handkerchief, hesitated, then left it exactly where it was. He would not use kindness to persuade me. He would respect the choice I had just made, even if it cost us both. That afternoon, the interviews began. One frightened server accepted Hale's offer and signed a statement against me. No one blamed him aloud. He had chosen his children's future over mine. As the news reached the kitchen, the room fell into a silence heavier than fear. I realized then that protecting dignity sometimes meant accepting that good people could make painful choices. And if I wanted to keep believing in the promise my mother left me, I would have to bear the cost without asking someone else to carry it for me. The signed statement lay on the kitchen table between us, carrying the frightened server's name beneath words I knew were not his. Adrian read it once. Then he reached for his phone. I covered it with my hand before he could make the call. He looked at my fingers, then at my face. "Don't," I said. Hale bought a lie. Adrian's voice remained quiet, which made the anger beneath it more frightening. "And he used a father's fear to do it. So you'll destroy him?" "I'll remove his ability to do this again." It sounded reasonable. Clean. Almost merciful. But I had seen the ledgers in his study. I knew how many shelters, kitchens, and families were tied to the councilman's influence. Adrian could defeat him before sunset. Other people would spend years paying for the victory. I lifted my hand from the phone. You asked what I wanted to protect first. His gaze sharpened. This is no longer only about you. It never was. My voice broke on the last word, and I hated that it did. I pulled the old linen handkerchief from my pocket and placed it beside the statement. The knot he had tied around my finger was still pressed into the fabric. You taught me that power should carry its own cost. Don't make innocent people carry yours. For one breath, the man who controlled every room looked as though he had nowhere to stand. His hand moved toward the handkerchief, then stopped before touching it. If I do nothing, Hale will keep coming. I know. He'll take your job. Maybe. He'll make sure no respectable house hires you. I swallowed. Then I'll clean somewhere that doesn't call cruelty respectable. Adrian turned away, his shoulders rigid beneath the weight of everything he could command and one choice he could not make for me. A message arrived moments later. Hale would withdraw the complaints, restore the charity partnerships, and leave the staff alone, if I signed a resignation stating that I had misunderstood him. Adrian's chief of staff waited by the door. Say no, Adrian said, but the words came without force. He had promised to respect my choices. Now that promise was hurting him. I read the resignation slowly. Signing it would protect the kitchen, the frightened server, and every family depending on the shelters. It would also turn my silence into Hale's innocence. Adrian stepped closer, then stopped before the distance between us disappeared. Grace, you don't owe this house your name. I looked at the cream-colored apron tied around my waist. For the first time, it did not feel like proof that I was invisible. It felt like something I had chosen to honor. I untied it, folded it carefully, and placed it in Adrian's hands. I'm not giving him my name, I whispered. I'm giving them tomorrow. Then I signed. The charity funding returned within the hour. The interviews stopped. The staff kept their jobs. And before Adrian could use his power to undo my choice, I walked out of Romano House carrying nothing, not even the handkerchief he had once trusted me to hold. Adrian found me before dawn at the bus stop 3 blocks from Romano House, still wearing the black suit from the gala and carrying my cream-colored apron folded across both hands. He stopped beneath the weak streetlight but did not ask me to return. He did not tell me the resignation was invalid. He simply held out the apron and waited for me to decide whether to take it. You left this with me, he said. I looked at the careful square of fabric, then at the old linen handkerchief resting on top of it. That wasn't mine. My mother stitched it. His thumb pressed once against the worn corner before he lowered his hand. Suddenly, every pause I had mistaken for calculation carried a different weight. The handkerchief had not been kindness borrowed from a drawer. It had been the one thing he still handled as though gentleness could keep loss from becoming cruelty. I reached for the apron but left the handkerchief where it was. You should keep that. I did, he answered. For years. It never made me kinder. His voice caught so quietly I almost missed it. You did. No grand confession followed. He only placed the handkerchief inside the fold of my apron and stepped back, surrendering both objects and the choice attached to them. I won't undo what you signed, he said. You protected people who could not afford my war. I will respect that, even though it costs me the right to keep you near me. A car approached, then slowed. Behind the windshield sat the young server who had signed against me. 2 kitchen workers were beside him. Then another car stopped. And another. None had been summoned by Adrian. One by one, employees stepped onto the sidewalk carrying written statements of their own. The frightened father came last. His hands shook as he tore Hale's version in half. She gave up her job so I could keep mine, he said. I can't keep it by helping him take her name. Adrian never ordered them to speak. That was why their voices mattered. By noon, the shelter's boards had copies of every statement, along with Hale's demand that my resignation purchase their funding. The partnerships did not collapse. They removed him instead, choosing new oversight rather than allowing charity to remain a weapon. Hale lost the obedience he had mistaken for loyalty because the people he pressured were no longer standing alone. Nothing returned untouched. My resignation remained signed. My position remained gone. Adrian's alliances remained damaged. But the price no longer belonged only to the weakest person in the room. He looked at the apron in my hands. I wasn't protecting you because I thought you were helpless, he said. I was protecting the part of myself I thought had died with her. I folded the handkerchief once more and placed it back in his palm. Then I kept the apron. Don't protect her through me, I whispered. Become the man she believed you could be. The bus arrived. Adrian moved aside, leaving the door open and my future entirely mine. I stepped onto the first stair, then turned back, not because he had asked me to stay, but because, for the first time, he had learned how to let me choose. My hand stayed on the bus rail while Adrian waited beneath the streetlight, making no move to call me back. In part 1, silence had made me feel invisible. Now his silence gave me room. I stepped down. Not toward the house. Toward him. My resignation stands, I said. His face tightened, but he nodded. I know. And I won't return as someone who can be dismissed to protect another man's pride. He held my gaze without reaching for the decision. Then tell me what returning would mean. Months later, I stood in the Romano kitchen beneath the same warm lights, wearing the same cream-colored apron with one difference: my name was stitched above the pocket. I no longer served the house as a maid. I managed the kitchen staff, trained new employees, and sat in every meeting where working conditions were discussed. Adrian had offered the position once. Then he waited while I negotiated every boundary. The final agreement carried both our signatures. The broken plate from that first night had never been replaced with something grander. One white porcelain shard rested in a small wooden frame near the pantry door, not as a monument to pain, but as a reminder that no one working beneath that roof would be treated as disposable again. When a nervous new server dropped a bowl during dinner service, the kitchen froze at the sound. The girl fell to her knees, reaching for the pieces with bare hands. I crossed the room and stopped her before she touched them. Your hands first, I said, placing a towel beside her. The floor can wait 5 minutes. Across the kitchen, the young cook I had once protected quietly turned off the nearest burner and brought her a bandage. Kindness moved through the room without waiting for permission. That was the part no contract could have created. Near midnight, after the last plate left the kitchen, Adrian appeared in the doorway. He no longer entered expecting every room to rearrange itself around him. He waited until I finished checking the ovens, then placed the old linen handkerchief on the table beside my folded apron. The fabric had been repaired where time had weakened it. Not hidden. Repaired. Dinner, he said. One word. No command inside it. I looked toward the staff, but the youngest server was already locking the pantry while the others finished together. They no longer needed me to carry every burden alone. I untied the apron and folded it carefully, though I did not leave it behind. Adrian opened the kitchen door, then stepped aside. The same doorway I had once chosen in anger now waited without fear on either side of it. I picked up the handkerchief, placed it gently over the apron, and walked through beside him. Behind us, someone laughed as porcelain touched porcelain without breaking. This time, the kitchen held no tears.